good evening, and welcome back. Tonight we're traveling high above the mortal world to a realm of thunder and prophecy, jealousy and fate, the world of the ancient Greek gods. We'll explore the. As always, I'd love to know where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it for you? Whether you're lying in bed, drifting off to the sound of soft thunder, or just taking a moment to. An age, nor sound to echo the birthing of the world. There was only chaos, an empty yawning vastness, boundless and dark. The raw potential of everything that would ever be. From this silent chaos. Alongside her rose Tartarus, the deep pit, the shadowy cavern beneath all things, black and unknowable, destined to become the prison of gods. From the same murky stillness cameos, the force of desire and union, the soft mystery that would compel form to seek form and life to reach for life. Then came Nyx, the velvet of night, cloaking the world in her sable wings, and Erebus. Toward the sun, even when there is no sun to see. Gaia, first and greatest of the primordial beings, bore from within herself a child to crown the heavens. Uranus, the sky, was vast and starry. A canopy arched forever above her. He was her equal in size and force, but it was she who made him, and it was she who welcomed him. Together they formed the first union of earth and sky. And from that coupling came 12 mighty beings who would inherit the world in their image. These were the Titans, 6 male and 6 female, each more radiant and more terrible than the last, whose light would pass to the sun. Aetus, progenitor of suffering and toil, and Chronos, youngest and most cunning with his hard eyes and sharper ambition. Their sisters were Thea, whose gaze bore. So he forced them back into Gaia's womb, shoving them into the darkness of Tartarus, burying them deep in her body, where he believed they could be forgotten. Gaia groaned beneath the weight of them. Her belly ached, her veins split with strain, and though she loved Uranus once, the pain he caused her turned her heart cold. Her children screamed in her depths, bound and blind, and her anger kindled like coals beneath wet ash. Gaia, the earth herself, plotted revenge. She called out in silence to her Titan sons, begging one to rise up and strike the sky. But fear silenced. He severed his father's manhood, and the sky screamed. The blood of Uranus spattered the earth and foamed upon the sea. From the earth where it fell, Gaia gave birth again. The Furies rose. Black, cloaked spirits of vengeance with eyes dripping blood and hair knotted with serpents. The giants were born huge and violent. Their feet rooted in the mountains, and their rage as old as night. And from the white foam that frothed around the severed flesh in the sea, a goddess arose fully grown. Aphrodite, laughter-loving and deadly, born not from a womb, but from blood and salt and sky. Uranus fled the world, retreating to the heavens, cursing Chronos with his last breath. He cried out that Chronos too would be overthrown by his own child, that the wheel of fate would turn as it always must, grinding even the strongest to dust. But Chronos only laughed, crowned in blood, holding the sickle that had made him king. He cast the severed flesh into the sea and turned to his brothers and sisters. The age of Uranus had ended. The age of the Titans had begun. The world was young, and already it had known betrayal, pain, ambition, and prophecy. These would not be the last. Not in a world where gods could bleed and mothers could plot and children could become kings. With Uranus dethroned and his screams still echoing in the farthest corners of the cosmos. No divine sanction to crown his rule. He simply was king, as all tyrants are once the stronger hand falls. His brothers and sisters looked upon him, not with love, but with the sharp and glittering. Even if Chronos did not, that the pattern had already been sown. Fathers fall to sons, and kings do not rule forever. But the world was young, and the Titans rejoiced. For an age there was peace. The air was thick with life, and the soil hummed beneath the Titans' steps. Mountains grew tall and proud, and rivers found their winding ways through the new lands of the earth. Chronos ruled with the certainty of one who has taken power through blood and will not give it up easily. Beside him stood his sister and queen, Rhea, as regal and cold as starlight, her gaze unreadable, and her silence as deep as the ocean trenches. Together, they brought forth the second generation of gods, beings who would later bear the names of Olympus, but who in this age were only children yet? Waits. It clings to the edges of every throne and settles into the marrow of the one who sits upon it. Crones, for all his might and mastery, could not forget the words of his father. Silent. Crones took it without suspicion and swallowed it as he had the others, believing the threat once more subdued. The child, a boy with eyes like storm clouds and a cry like thunder, was spirited away by Rhea to the island of Cree, far from Crones' gaze. There, in a cave hidden among the folds of the mountains, young Zeus was raised in secret. His cradle was carved from rock and hung by golden chains from the branches of a sacred tree so that he might neither touch earth nor sky, hiding him from the reach of his father's sight. Around him danced the Keats, armored youths who, her milk rich and divine, and from her horn the cornucopia would one day spill unending bounty. The nymphs bathed him in sacred water and whispered to him stories of the stars. As Zeus grew, so too did his strength, and the wrath of the heavens waited behind his eyes. He learned of his birth, of his devoured siblings, of the stone that Crones had swallowed in his place. And he vowed, in the cold of night and in the echoing chambers of the cave, that he would not let the same fate fall upon him. The world outside turned, unaware that in a hidden grotto, vengeance was ripening like fruit on the vine. The age of Titans endured, but in the roots of the mountain, a child of thunder listened to the earth and prepared. The same prophecy that had felled Uranus now beat like a second heart beneath the soil. For in the world of gods, no feast lasts forever. No crown sits easy, and no power is ever truly safe from the child born in shadow with a name whispered only by mothers and nymphs. For a time, the rule of Crones was hailed across the breadth of the earth as a golden age, not for its justice, nor its mercy, but for its simplicity. There was order. There was stability. The Titans held sway over the known world, their strength unmatched, and their names etched like iron into the bones of the mountains and the furthest stretch of ocean. Mortals newly awakened from pain of famine or disease. They lived in communion with the earth, and the earth, still young and strong, fed them without complaint. This age bore no kings among men, no cities fortified by blood, no altars scorched with sacrifice. The gods walked distant and proud, and the world turned beneath their shadow, undisturbed by revolt or upheaval. And at the center of it all stood Crones, him like a sword balanced on a fraying cord, poised to fall with the weight of a whisper. The voice of his father still echoed in the corners of Crones' mind, soft as smoke and sharp as broken stone, warning that his own son would rise against him. And Crones, for all his strength, had learned well what happens to those who ignore prophecy. He had been the prophecy once. He had drawn the blade. He knew its power, and so he chose not to wait for the knife to find his throat. He chose to smother the future before it could open its eyes. When Rhea, his sister and queen, bore him their first child, a daughter wrapped in flame and warmth, Crones took her from Rhea's arms before the mother could even name her. The child was Hestia, goddess of the hearth, the still fire at the center of all homes. Crones looked into the infant's eyes that carried no threat, no rebellion, only innocence and a flickering flame. And he opened his jaws and swallowed her whole. There was no blood, no breaking of bone, no scream. She passed from the world like a dream dissolving at dawn, her divine body vanishing into the cavern of his belly, imprisoned but undestroyed. The act was not driven by hatred. It was sacrifice offered to fear. When Rhea bore their second, Dida, goddess of the harvest and the waiting field, Crones did the same. Then Hea, the stormy future queen, proud even in infancy. Then Hades, whose dark gaze was already fixed on the caverns below. Then Poseidon, wreathed in salt and breath of sea, his cries echoing like waves against the shore. Wrath, her arms again and again emptied of her children, trembled with a fury she did not speak aloud, but the ache in her womb did not fade. The cycle continued, and in the quiet she turned not to her husband, not to her sisters, but to Gaia, the eternal, the wise, who knew well the ache of betrayal and the bitter taste of vengeance. Gaia, who had once plotted the fall of Uranus, listened once more, and together they crafted a plan not of war or confrontation, but of quiet defiance, the kind that grows in the spaces between heartbeat and breath. When Rhea bore her sixth child, too distant to hear a cry, there in secrecy and sorrow she gave birth to Zeus. The boy was strong from the first breath, his lungs full of thunder, and his fingers curled like they were already reaching for a crown. Rhea kissed his brow and swore no titan's jaws would ever close around him. When she returned to Cronies, she carried not her son, but a swaddled stone. It was wrapped in soft linen and smeared with the scent of afterbirth. Cronies, blinded by habit and dread, did not question. He took the bundle and swallowed it whole. The deception worked. Zeus was spared, and high in the mountains, surrounded by loyal nymphs and shielded by the clanging dance of the Caretzes, the infant god was fed with the milk of Umla and lulled to sleep by lullabies older than language. The years passed, and the boy grew. He grew in strength, in cunning, and in purpose. He knew his siblings were not dead, but bound in the belly of the tyrant. He knew his father's time was borrowed, a fire fed only by the kindling of fear. And he knew, as all sons must one day know, that the world his father had built was not one he would inherit. It was one he would have to tear down. There, but not yet. The golden age continued, its days numbered in secret, its sunsets beautiful and doomed. The Titans ruled still, but the wind had changed. Somewhere far from the throne, whispered to him of duty and vengeance. The Cretan cave in which he had been hidden still echoed with the clang of the Curette's weapons. A dance of defiance that masked his infancy and now in his swallowed yet undigested, immortal and imprisoned, flickering like smothered stars. Hestia, the gentle flame. Dido, the patient harvest. Hea, fierce with pride. Hades, brooding in the dark. Poseidon, restless like the tide. They lived, and Zeus felt them in his dreams, their essence calling to him like voices from beneath the sea. He had not known them, not truly, but he bore there the wise Titaness, who understood the tides of prophecy and the craft of cunning. Together, Zeus and Matisse plotted the undoing of Cronies, not with swords nor storms, but with a drink laced with ancient magic, a draught brewed from the roots of the earth and the bile of serpents, bitter and thick with the power of reversal. Zeus did not come in wrath. He came as a servant, veiled in humility, bearing the poisoned drink in a goblet of carved stone. Cronies, as proud as he was weary, never suspected. He drank, and the world changed. First came the stone, cold and round, wrapped still in the cloth Rhea had once pressed into his hands. It tumbled from his throat and struck the earth with the weight of prophecy fulfilled. Then came the gods. One by one, his children returned to the world, full-formed and radiant, as if no time had passed, as if they had merely been dreaming. Hestia, Dido, Hades, Poseidon. They emerged not as infants, but as immortals forged in the crucible of. It hung between them unspoken, but ironclad. They would not be devoured again. They would rise. They would make war. And so began the Titanomachy, the war that tore the heavens and split the earth. Towering beings of vast power, each etched with the memory of the first age. On the other side stood the younger gods, the Olympians, raw and burning with purpose, wielding the fury of youth and the justice of rebellion. The war was not a single battle, not a clash of arms that ended with a victor crowned. It was a storm that lasted a decade, a siege against time itself. Mountains were thrown like javelins. Rivers ran red, not with blood, but with the force of the divine. Day and night lost meaning as the heavens burned and the earth cracked beneath the weight of struggle. At first, the Titans held the upper hand. Cronies fought with a desperation born of inevitability, striking with all the terror of one who knows his throne cannot last, but refuses to fall without fire. Zeus descended into the pit, the realm of shadow and sorrow, where even the light of the gods could barely cling to the walls. There he found them bound in suffering, their hunned hands limp, their hunned mouths silenced. He broke their chains. He spoke to them not as a master, but as a brother. In return, they gave him gifts. The Cyclopes, once scorned, forged weapons to match the fury of the sky. For Zeus, they made the thunderbolt, a spear of lightning that split the heavens with a single cry. For Poseidon, they crafted the trident, a weapon that could stir the oceans and shatter. Islands cracked in two. Hades, unseen, slipped through the ranks of titans, sowing confusion and fear. At last, Crones fell not in a blaze of glory, but in exhaustion, overcome not only by the might of his children, but by the prophecy he had tried to defy. The titans were defeated, bound in chains of unbreakable bronze, and hurled into Tartarus deeper than dreams beneath even the roots of the earth. There, guarded by the hun-handed ones, they would remain howling in silence, memories of a power that could not outlast time. Zeus stood over the battlefield, not as a child of prophecy, but as a king. The sky cleared. The war was over. The age of the Titans had ended. A new age was about to begin. But peace in the world of gods is always fleeting, and the throne, once is never safe. The war had ended, or so the gods believed. The Titans were cast into Tartarus, bound beneath the roots of the world, and the sky, once split with thunder and the shouts of battle, had gone still. Of the new gods, their voices were loud with triumph, and their laughter rolled like wine through the stone corridors, but far beneath their feet, deeper than the darkness of Hades. The earth remembered its wounds. The blood of Uranus still pulsed in its buried veins, and Gaia, ancient and enduring, stirred in fury. She had helped the Olympians in their war, but her allegiance had never belonged to Zeus. Her loyalty was to balance, to vengeance, and to the old order that had been cast down. The fall of Crones had not healed the pain of Uranus. It had only shifted the weight of power from one hand to another. The throne of the sky had changed owners, but its arrogance had remained, and Gaia, who had seen 2 generations of kings rise and fall, was not yet done. With prophecy, in the bowels of the world, Gaia called upon Tartarus himself, that shadowed abyss which swallowed light and mocked the notion of form. Together, they created a final sun, and his eyes burned with fire. When he breathed, it scorched the sky. When he roared, even the dead stirred in their tombs. He was the last born of the earth, the storm that would end all thrones. The Olympians saw him and despaired. They had tasted war, but they had never seen this. Many fled. Apollo, swift as ever, vanished to the west. Hermes slipped into shadow. Ares, god of war. Typhon hurled mountains like stones. He tore up rivers and flung them skyward. His serpents lashed the stars. Zeus met him with storm. Lightning burst from his palm like spears of flame, their clash reshaping the world with every blow. Zeus struck Typhon down upon Mount Haemus, and the blood of the monster stained its slopes forever. But Typhon did not die. He rose again, and crippled and bound, Zeus was carried by Typhon to a distant cave in Sicya, hidden among the black cliffs and jagged rocks where he was imprisoned, helpless and mocked. But gods are not so easily slain. The tale of Zeus's captivity passed into the hands of Hermes and Pan, who together crept into the cave disguised by shadow and guile. They tricked the monstrous guardian and stole back the Cetus, fleeing with the speed of wind and goat foot. When they returned the stolen strength to Zeus, the skies once again shivered with his fury. No longer bound, no longer silent, he rose in wrath. Might of his thunderbolt into Typhon's heart. The blow shook the world. Typhon screamed, his voice a chorus of agony that shattered the mountains and drove beasts mad. Cracked and broken, his body chained in molten stone, his breath venting as smoke, his limbs writhing in futile rage. The volcano that bears his prison still rumbles with his fury, still smokes with his breath. It is said that when Etna erupts, it is Typhon stirring in his chains, dreaming of vengeance and storm. With the monster defeated, Zeus returned to Olympus, not only as king, but as savior. Hands of a god is never without spectacle. To punish mankind for the theft of fire, Zeus commissioned the gods to shape a new creature, one more dangerous than any monster of the past. From clay, Hephaestus molded her. From beauty, Aphrodite blessed her. From charm and deceit, Hermes and Apollo lent their gifts. Her name was Pandora, and she was sent to Prometheus, Prometheus's foolhardy. Grief, betrayal, war. Only hope remained inside, clinging to the lid as the last whisper in the dark. Thus, the age of mortals truly began, not in innocence, but in knowledge and struggle. and in fear. Still, Zeus ruled. He looked down from Olympus and watched the slow march of mankind, their prayers rising like smoke, their temples built in stone and salt and supplication, never letting the fire die. The earth was no longer wild. It had been shaped, defined, and divided. But beneath its surface, Gaia still slept, and the Titans still stirred in their prisons. And the age of Zeus, though just begun, would not be without its trials. High upon Mount Olympus, where no mortal foot could tread, and no storm could reach unless summoned by divine will, the great halls of the gods rose from cloud and stone. Marble columns glistened in the light of dawn, and silver fires burned eternally along corridors that stretched wider than valleys. A terrible shield fringed with serpents and crowned with the head of the Gorgon. His voice summoned storms. His will was law. And beside him, cloaked not in thunder but in ice, stood Hera, his sister and queen, the goddess of marriage, sovereignty, and divine vengeance. Where Zeus's rule was loud and crackling like the sky in battle, Ha's dominion was silent and enduring. Could conjure, for she did not fall easily, nor did she offer her hand lightly. Zeus came to her cloaked in mist in the form of a trembling bird, cold and small, seeking shelter in her lap. She cradled the creature, unknowing. And when her guard had dropped, Zeus revealed himself and claimed her with the strength of a storm. She wept, not with sorrow, but with fury, and vowed she would marry him, if only to bind the offense in the chains of law. And so she became his wife, not by consent freely given, but by oath sealed in divine tradition. From that day forward, Ha sat beside Zeus. On Olympus, proud and bright-eyed, but never tamed. Theirs was a marriage of thrones, not hearts. Zeus, for all his grandeur, was a god of appetites. He desired beauty and cleverness, song and flesh. And he pursued his hungers wherever they led him. Nymphs, goddesses, mortal queens, and unsuspecting maidens all were drawn into his orbit. Sometimes by charm, often by deceit. He changed shape too. Reach them. A swan, a bull, a shower of gold. He bent the laws of form and time to satisfy his whims. And Hera, bound by her station, watched. She knew. She always knew. The queen of heaven was no. She did not strike Zeus. She struck what he loved. His mistresses who bore the children of fate and tragedy. His sons and daughters, half divine, doomed from birth to carry the burden of their father's sins. Io turned into a heifer and chased across the world by a biting gadfly. Semele burned to ash by Zeus's divine form. Her unborn child ripped from her body and sewn into Zeus's own thigh. Leto exiled and hunted while pregnant with twins. Alcman who bore Heracles and was hounded by Hera's hatred even before the child drew his first breath. Hera's punishments were cruel, but they were always deliberate. She did not rage blindly. She orchestrated the ruin of those who defied her dignity. There was one time, it is said, when Hea could bear no more. The weight of humiliation, of whispered jests in Olympus's golden halls, of the quiet sympathy in Athena's eyes, and the mocking laughter of Aphrodite drove her to action. She gathered the other gods. Poseidon with his trident clenched in scorn, Athena with her cold logic, Apollo with his sun-drenched pride, and together they plotted against Zeus. While the king of the gods slept, his fury seized Hera. He hung her from the sky by golden fetters, her arms stretched wide, anvils tied to her ankles. She wept, but not for mercy. She wept because he had made her spectacle, because in his wrath he had tried to humiliate her before the world. She did not forget. In time he released her. There was no apology. There was no reconciliation. Only an unspoken truce between sovereigns who knew that their rule depended on standing side by side, whether in unity or in silence. Hea returned to her throne and resumed her place as queen, more watchful than ever. Dynasties of mortal kings, proud, fractured, bound by blood and burden. And at its heart sat Zeus and Hera, eternal and embattled, locked in a marriage that had outlasted empires and would outlast. The offspring of Zeus entered the world like omens, sudden and radiant and strange, as if the very fabric of existence could not contain them for long. Their births were tangled in prophecy, in vengeance, in deceit and pride, and none more so than that of Athena, the bright-eyed goddess of wisdom, of war and reason, of strategy and the cities of men. Her coming was not foretold by stars, nor sung by nymphs, but whispered in fear by the earth itself. For Zeus had taken Metis, the cleverest of the Titanes, daughter of Oannes and Tethys, whose mind was said to be as deep as the sea and as subtle as mist. She was not seduced with force or fire. Zeus pursued her with patience, cloaking himself in flattery and argument, drawing her into his embrace, not out of passion. First, a daughter wiser than her mother. The second, a son who would be mightier than his father and cast him down as Zeus had cast down Cronus. And Cronus had struck down Uranus before him. Zeus, who had once freed the world from the tyranny of his sire, now trembled at the thought of his own undoing. And so, when Metis was with child, he acted. He summoned her with sweet words and coaxed her to his side. Then, without warning or hesitation, he opened his mouth and swallowed her whole. The gods who witnessed it said nothing. The air stood still. Metis vanished into his body, and with her went the child she carried. But Metis was not like other beings. She did not die. She lived within Zeus, her voice curling around his bones, her knowledge spreading through his limbs. Like wine through a golden cup, she nested in his mind, whispering, growing, watching. And in time, the child she bore began to press against the boundaries of her prison, not with fists, but with thought, with reason, with power that no father could contain. Zeus began to suffer. At first, it was a stiffness in the temples, then a pounding that shook his very vision. No healing nor incantation soothed him. No god could ease his pain. Finally, in desperation, he called upon Hephaestus, the smith of Olympus, the god of flame and craft and forge. In some tellings all others. She was wisdom and strategy, and unlike her father, she did not bend easily to impulse or wrath. She was war, but not fury. She was justice, but not mercy, the olive tree and the spear. Lame from birth, was said to have been born of Hio alone. In her fury over Zeus birthing Athena without her, Hia resolved to bear a child without his seed. But when she saw the boy twisted in leg and limb, she recoiled. Whether she cast him from Olympus out of disgust, or Zeus himself flung the child in anger during a quarrel, none now say for certain, but Haristus fell. He tumbled from the bitterness, but in brilliance. Hysis built wonders, golden thrones that moved, automatons that walked, jewelry that shimmered like the sun. He shaped beauty from flame. And in time, he returned. She could not rise, could not move. The gods begged Haristus to release her, but he refused. I have no mother, he said. Only after Dionysus found him and gave him wine, singing him into joy and stupor, did Hephaestus relent. He came back to Olympus riding a mule crowned in ivy and freed her. From then on, he claimed his place as the smith of the gods, and they could not do without him. Yet his bitterness remained. His heart forged in fire was not immune to pain. When he was wedded to Aphrodite, the most beautiful of all goddesses, it was not love, but order that arranged the match. His sorrow into weapons, where he poured his rage into steel. So it was that the children of Zeus did not come to him in peace. They arrived like omens, like challenges. Athena sprung from prophecy and fear. Hyste cast out and risen in spite of scorn. They were not sons and daughters in the mortal sense. They were gods, fully formed and crowned with purpose. And Olympus, golden and eternal, though it seemed, echoed always with the clanging of their stories. The footsteps of war, the hiss of steam, the quiet hush of wisdom, and the soft grinding of resentment beneath the marble floors. Athena, born without a mother, from the very skull of Zeus in a burst of thunder and thought, stood unlike any other goddess in Olympus. She did not crawl. She did not cry. She did not wail for milk, or warmth or cradle. She sprang into the world in armor, golden and unyielding, with a spear already in her hand and reason burning behind her eyes. Her birth was not a miracle, but a warning. For no god who arrives armed and silent can be trusted to simply stand idle. The Olympians watched her with awe, for they knew this was not a goddess of soft love or idle beauty. This was a goddess of judgment and will, of strategy, of city walls, of laws written in flame. In the long halls of Olympus, Where jealousy and lust often stirred more quickly than wisdom, she moved with purpose. Where other gods shouted or laughed or wept, Athena merely looked. She spoke seldom, but when she did, her words cleaved through silence like a blade through silk. Unlike Ari, who relished the painted board, hers was the realm of generals, not berserkers. When men prayed to her before battle, they prayed not for fury, but for clarity. They asked for strength in the shield wall, for unbroken lines, for the wisdom to know when to strike and when to wait. She answered those who showed discipline and courage. She did not favor cowards, nor did she indulge recklessness. And when she walked upon the battlefield, and there were times she did, she moved like a shadow of bronze and wind, guiding the brave, toppling the foolish. Her shield alight with the Gorgon's head, and her feet never touching blood. Her patronage extended far beyond war. Athena was a goddess of cities, not in name only, but in soul. She brought order to the chaos of wandering tribes. She gave mortals the first glimmer of what it meant to live not as beasts, but as citizens. Architecture, shipbuilding, the loom, the plow, all these the ancients believed came from her. She taught crafts and strategy, the weaving of cloth and the weaving of law. Where she walked, men began to shape stone into temples, to raise statues not in fear, but in admiration. And among all the cities, one became her own. When Crops, the first king of a newly risen city on the rocky promontory of Attica, prepared to offer his city to a god, both Poseidon and Athena appeared, each laying claim to the people. Poseidon, proud and tempestuous, struck the earth with his trident, and from the rocks sprang a fountain of salt water, or in some versions, a magnificent warhorse. That her skill was her own. When Athena heard this, she came down not in storm or fury, but in disguise, an old woman with tired eyes, and warned Arachne to humble herself. But Arachne refused. She challenged the goddess to a contest. Athena dropped her disguise, and they both won. The goddess with the glory of Olympus, the justice of the gods, the foolishness of those who dared defy them. Arachne with her mortal hands were the sins of the gods. Zeus disguised as a swan, a bull, a shower of gold, taking mortal women by guile and force. When they finished, both tapestries were perfect. But it was the truth in Arachne's work that stung deepest, and Athena, humiliated by mortal craft and mortal courage, struck the loom and tore the threads. Arachne, broken with shame and terror, tried to take her own life. But Athena stopped her and transformed her instead into a spider cursed to weave forever in silence. Her skill preserved, but her form twisted. This was not mercy. This was judgment. She was not a goddess of love, nor of forgiveness. Unlike Aphrodite, she did not flirt. Unlike Hea, she did not rage in jealousy. Athena remained forever virgin, not from chastity. From Athena, no refuge from her sight. She saw not only what was, but what must be. And when she moved, the world moved with her. Where Athena walked in silence and light, her spear sharp with. Into the world, clad not in armor but in violence, the gods looked upon him with unease. Even his father, king of the skies, harbored little love for the child. For Ares did not obey, did not bargain, did not calculate. He lived for conflict, and conflict followed him like a loyal dog. Unlike Athena, whose clarity made men better, Ares sowed chaos. He strode into battle not to guide mortals, but to revel in their madness. Where he passed, men forgot formation. Brothers turned against brothers. Wounds festered, shields broke, mercy withered. He did not reward honor. He did not punish cowardice. To Ares, all that mattered was the clash, the scream, the press of blade to flesh. His armor was always stained, his voice always raised. His chariot, drawn by steeds, foaming red at the mouth, bore him into every war with a grin upon his lips, and his eyes alight with lust for ruin. He did not march alone. Beside him ran his children. Phobos, the god of fear, who whispered panic into the hearts of armies, and Deimos, the god of terror, who made even brave men forget their names. With them came Io, goddess of battle herself, clad in crimson and flame, her hands always wet with gore. Wherever Ares rode, they followed. A family of shadows cast long over the earth, turning every campaign into carnage. The Greeks feared him more than they honored him. They built him few temples, offered him few songs. For to worship Ares was not to seek protection. It was to beg that he pass by. And yet for all his brutality, Ares was not a simple god, and complained to Zeus like a wounded child. But Zeus, weary of Ares and his endless thirst for strife, offered no comfort. He called him the most hateful of all his children. Still Ares endured. For war never ends. Cities fall, kings rise, the banners change. But Ares remains. In every scream of rage, in every knife turned in the dark, in every war camp where fire smokes and soldiers sharpen blades with shaking hands, Ares is there. Not noble, not wise, but necessary. For mankind has never known peace for long. And so long as they make war, the god of bloodshed will ride. Shape the rhythm of gods and men alike. They were born not in the high halls of cloud and marble, but far away on the hidden island of Dos, where the sea winds whispered through groves of laurel, and the ground trembled with the breath of prophecy. Their mother was Leto, daughter of the Titans Kuas and Phoebe, and once a companion of Zeus in the earliest days of his power. But her womb, heavy with the gods' children, became the subject of divine scorn and pursuit. Hea, ever jealous and watchful, sent her wrath across the earth. She forbade any land under the light of the sun to shelter Leto. Every city, every island, every peak and valley turned her away. She wandered for days beneath the gaze of a vengeful sky, swollen with life and hunted like prey. Even the rivers ran dry where she knelt, and the beasts of the land turned from her path. And so she came to Delos, a floating island unclaimed by earth or sea, a place that swayed upon the tides and bore no anchor to the world of mortals. There the island opened to her. There, beneath the twilight sky, Leto gave birth. First came Artemis, silent and silver-eyed, a goddess of the hunt, of wild places and from her lips came words that were not her own. Apollo did not speak through fire or fury, but through vision. His was the light that blinded gently, the truth that could not be escaped. When Coronis, a mortal woman bearing his child, betrayed him with another, Apollo's rage was swift. He killed her not with a sword, but with knowledge. He sent his sister Artemis to do the deed. And the arrow that pierced Coronis' chest was cold and silent. But before her body was consumed by flame, Apollo tore the child from her womb. That child was Asclepius, god of healing, who would one day raise the dead and be struck down for defying the boundary between life and death. Apollo loved fiercely, but he did not forgive easily. He walked the world in many forms. Apollo was not immune to failure. When he loved tragically. His heart sought what it could not hold. Daphne the nymph fled from him, calling upon her father, a river god, to save her. He turned her into a laurel tree, her skin hardening to bark even as Apollo reached to touch her. And so he wore her leaves as a crown, a symbol not of triumph, but of eternal yearning. Come. For now, he stood tall, golden, and terrible in beauty, the archer of Olympus, the seer of truths, the god who brought order to chaos and music to silence. Men raised temples in his name. Raised, before the names of gods were chiseled into marble, and before man dared to measure the world with lines and laws, there was the wilderness. It spread without boundary, thick with shadow and the scent of laurel and pine. There were no kings in those woods, no armies, no thrones, only the rustling of animals, the howl of wind, and the whisper of water beneath the moon. And it was there that Artemis ruled, not from a palace of stone, but from the hollows of trees and the peaks of untamed mountains. She was born in silence, her birth coming first upon the island of Delos. From that moment, she was marked not just as his twin, but as his mirror, not opposite in essence, but in nature. Where he brought order, she preserved freedom. Where he spoke in riddles and reason, she moved in instinct and silence. And while Apollo shone in the day, Artemis became the moon's quiet flame, cold, distant, and eternal. Artemis asked for her place in the cosmos early. While still a child, she approached her father, Zeus, with clarity unmatched by many gods thrice her age. She did not beg. She did not smile. She asked for a bow and arrows like her brothers. Untamed, she was the huntress, the protector of animals, the patron of young girls before they knew men, and the avenger of any who dared to trespass upon her sacred groves. She moved through forests, clad in silver, her bow always strung, her eyes sharper than the wolves that followed her steps. She did not walk. She glided. She did not speak much. Her voice was wind through leaves or the sharp whistle of an arrow. Mortals feared her as much as they honored her. For Artemis was not gentle. She had no patience for those who forgot their place. Niobe, queen of thieves, once mocked Leto for bearing only 2 children, while Niobe boasted of her own brood of 14. In her arrogance, she laughed at the goddess. Artemis did not reply with words. She came down from the mountains with her gods, weary of her cries, turned her into stone. But even in stone, the tears did not cease. Such was the vengeance of the twins. Artemis guarded her purity with steel. There was a man once named the goddess unclothed, her skin pale and unmarred, her form untouched by time or desire. She saw him. He froze, and with a glance, she transformed him into a stag. Confused, terrified, Acton fled into the woods. His limbs no longer his own, but his fate was already written. His own hounds, not recognizing their master, chased him down and tore him to pieces. The forest was quiet again, and the lesson was left unspoken. Yet Artemis was not cruelty itself. She was fairness, if not mercy. She healed as often as she harmed. She watched over childbirth, paradoxical though it seemed for a virgin goddess. Perhaps it was because she witnessed her own mother's pain. Perhaps it was because birth, like the moon, is a cycle of pain and light. Whatever the reason, women cried out to her in their labor, offering her honey and garlands of herbs, hoping she would soften her gaze just long enough to let the child live. Sometimes she did, sometimes she did not. The tales of Artemis are many, and not all end in death. She protected Iphigenia, the daughter of Agamemnon, who was to be sacrificed so that Greek ships might sail to Troy. At the last moment, once slain one of her sacred stags and boasted of it. No slight was forgotten. No oath was free. The world was hers to guard. And to guard it, she became hard as the stones beneath her feet. She did not marry. She did not yield. Orion the great hunter walked beside her once, perhaps as companion, perhaps as beloved. Some say he tried to take her. Others say he only sought her company. But in every telling, he died. Whether slain by Artemis' own arrow, or by Apollo's cunning trick, or by the sting of a great scorpion sent to preserve her solitude, the result was the same. Chill in her gaze. She is the goddess of the in-between. Not death, but what comes just before it. Not love, but its untouched shadow. She rules the night, but not in dreams. She rules the forests, but not for their beauty. She exists for herself alone, and the world moves around her. She is the moon above the battlefield, the silence before the arrow flies, the shape in the woods that never quite reveals itself. And even now, in every rustling grove and flicker of silver across a black sky, she is still watching. Before Olympus stood in triumph, before the sons of Crones tore down there, with Uranus stretched across Gaia like a shroud of stars. But Uranus feared the children Gaia bore him, those strange and monstrous offspring that did not resemble mortals or even gods. Crones, who took it and lay in wait. When Uranus descended once more to press himself against the earth, Crones rose and struck. The blade flashed through flesh and sky. Blood rained down upon the woman fully formed, a creature of such unnearly beauty that even the gods paused to watch. Her hair streamed like golden river reeds. Her skin shimmered like pearl. Where her feet touched the surf, flowers bloomed from salt. She came ashore on the island of Scytha, or perhaps Cyprus, for the tales differ. But in every telling, she was radiant and impossible. They named her Aphrodite. Take her place among them. Zeus gave her to Hystas, thinking to tame her with loyalty and craft. But Aphrodite was no wife of stone. She belonged to no one. Her beauty was not meant to be bound. She wandered freely, her eyes forever half-lit, her laughter sharp and soft all at once. The gods desired her. Mortals worshipped her. And wherever she went, the air turned heavy. She did not wield a sword. She did not hurl lightning. Her power was subtler and deeper. It slid beneath armor. It crept into the heart. It twisted vows and shattered kingdoms. No fortress could keep. Lust for him. and from that fire came ruin. When she favored a man, the gift was as dangerous as any curse. Anchises, a shepherd prince, caught her eye, and she descended to him in disguise, claiming to be a mortal maiden. When he lay with her, and later learned the truth, he trembled in fear. She bore him a son, Oeneus, who would carry a dying city's fate upon his back. But Aphrodite never returned to him. Her most enduring affair was with Ares, god of war, beauty and blood, pleasure and wrath. They were opposites, and they were alike. She met him not in the softness of bed chambers, but in the violent silence after battle. They lay together beneath golden nets, beneath the eyes of Olympus. And for all the mockery that followed, they did not part. She bore him children, Phobos and Deimos, terror and fear, who rode beside their father into battle. She also gave birth to Harmonia, goddess of concord, as if from that union of war and love might come some balance, however brief. But Aphrodite's greatest legacy was not in the bed or on the battlefield. It was in the tale that ignited the greatest war of myth, for it was she who promised Helen to Paris, the prince of Troy, in return for being named the fairest of goddesses. The judgment of Paris was no game. Hera offered power. Athena offered wisdom and victory. But Aphrodite offered love, and that was stronger than kingdoms. Paris chose her, and in doing so doomed his city. Helen, the wife of Minos, was taken, and the Greeks sailed to Troy with fire in their hearts. 10 years of blood followed. Achilles and Hector fell. Priam wept for his sons, and all because Aphrodite whispered in a prince's ear and smiled. Even among the gods, she was feared, not for might, not for wisdom, but for the madness she could inspire. She could make gods crawl. She could make kings grovel. She could turn brother against brother, father against son with nothing but a glance. Her magic girdle, the cestus, granted irresistible allure to whoever wore it. Even Hera borrowed it once in her schemes to distract Zeus. Yet Aphrodite herself needed no trinket. Her presence alone was enough to bend the will. She was not cruel for cruelty's sake, but she was not merciful. She did not love with patience. She did not nurture. She consumed. And yet the world worshipped her. Temples rose across the aisles, statues of smooth marble, eyes cast down in longing stood in her honor. Men and women alike burned incense at her altars, not out of fear, but out of hope. For who among mortals does not hunger for love, even knowing the cost? Aphrodite, born from the wound of the sky, carried within her the contradiction of all creation. That beauty is both blessing and burden. That love can build kingdoms and unmake them in the same breath. That desire does not yield to law or wisdom or even war. She smiled often. She wept rarely. And in every heart that has ever longed for another, could even cry. He fell for a day and a night, tumbling through cloud and wind until the sea took him in. There, beneath the waves, he was pulled from the water by Thetis and Eurynome, splendid than any in the halls of Olympus, etched with silver vines and golden beasts that shimmered when touched by light. But when she sat upon it, the trap was sprung. She could not rise. The throne bound her, gripped her like the judgment she had once passed without thought. The gods begged Histus to release her. They came in turns with flattery, threats, and bribes. But he refused them all. He had known the sea's cold embrace. He had heard the laughter of the dolphins where his father's voice should have been. He would not come unless brought. And it was Dionysus, the ever-smiling wanderer, who succeeded. He did not argue. He did not plead. He found Haristus, offered him wine, and drank with him deep into the night. By dawn, the smith rode back to Olympus upon a mule, drunk but unbent, his hammer slung across his back. He freed not in submission, but in triumph. And from that day, he claimed his place among the immortals. Yet even in the shining halls of Olympus, Hephaestus was never truly at ease. He was given a wife, the fairest of all goddesses, Aphrodite, radiant and cold as starlight. It was a marriage of arrangement, not affection. Beauty paired with deformity, love chained to labor. She was unfaithful, as many had whispered she would be. Her affair with Ares, bold and reckless, humiliated Hysus before the entire pantheon. But he did not rage as Ares would. He did not scream as Poseidon might have. He built a trap, a net so fine it was invisible, spun of threads no mortal could see, and he cast it over the lovers while they slept. Then he summoned the gods, not in fury, but in spectacle, and laid the lovers bare for all Olympus to see. The gods roared with laughter. They mocked and jeered. But Hystas did not smile. He stood beside them, silent, the fire in his forge burning low and cold that day. He released them when Poseidon offered payment, not because he needed gold, but because even vengeance could not bring peace. Still, the forge was his dominion. No other god could match his craftsmanship. He built the palaces of Olympus. He forged the aegis for Zeus, moved of their own accord, doors that opened for no one but their master, and automata that could walk and speak like men. His hands, though scarred, were more divine than any voice. His forge was not only the beating heart of Olympus. It was its memory, its legacy, its armor. And yet, he was always alone. In later tales, Haristus took revenge more quietly. He built Pandora, the first mortal woman, at the god's command. Crafted of clay and spirit, blessed with gifts from each of the Olympians, she was made beautiful beyond measure. But Haristus, who gave her form and breath, knew what she would carry. She was no blessing. She was a vessel, a punishment wrapped in gold. When she opened the jar, not a box as the poets later called it, the world changed. Sickness, sorrow, madness, and death poured forth. Only hope remained inside, trembling and unseen. It was his hand that shaped her. It was his will that obeyed the decree. But perhaps it was also his. Apollo. He was not solemn like Hades. But Hermes moved faster than any of them. His winged sandals barely kissed the ground, and his mind moved faster still. When Hera sought to torment Io, Zeus's mortal lover, by placing her under Argus' watchful guard, it was Hermes who came to her rescue. With stories sweet as honey and music soft as wine, he put Argus to sleep, blade in hand. His dagger was quick, but his wit was quicker. The eyes of Argus after death were set into the feathers of Hera's peacock, a bitter tribute. Hermes did not only walk in shadow. He brought invention. He crafted the first lyre from a tortoise shell, sinew, and ingenuity, and gifted it to Apollo as a peace offering. He gave mankind weights and measures, coinage and commerce, speech and calculation. Yet he remained ever untrustworthy. He lied as easily as he breathed. He tricked not for need but for pleasure, but even his deceptions carried the glimmer of genius. He was the god of the in-between, where chaos and order met in handshake or blade. In battle, he carried the messages of Zeus. On fields of blood and glory, it was Hermes who whispered orders into the ears of kings. Tales of war, but he was always there between every word, every pause, every unspoken vow. He had many lovers, though few were stories sung in temples. His son, Pan, born of a nymph, was a god of the wild, of madness, of pipes and panic, goat-legged and howling. Some said he fathered Hermaphroditus, child of Aphrodite, who bore both manhood and womanhood, twin in form. Hermes did not love in constancy. He loved in moments, in flashes, in games played beneath the moon. Temples to Hermes rose at borders and gates, crossroads and marketplaces, places where decisions were made and fates were changed. Travelers offered him stone cans piled high to mark a safe path. Thieves whispered his name before the theft. Merchants carved his image into their scales. And the dying, as they gasped their last, hoped to see him not in wrath, but in mercy, to have their souls carried not by darkness, but by a figure who smiled even at the end. For all his cunning, Hermes was never cruel. He was not a god of justice, but he played fair in his own way. He balanced the weight of the world between trick and truth, lie and law. He was the boundary that made movement possible. And as the world turned, as cities rose and fell, as armies marched and ships sank, Hermes walked unseen, smiling to himself, forever moving between what was, what is, and what might be. Before the wars in heaven, before the forging of thunder and the clash of titans, before even the rise of the 12 upon Olympus, there was Hestia. She was the eldest daughter of Crones and Rhea, the firstborn of that ancient brood, and she came into the world quietly, her cry soft and brief. Her father swallowed her whole, as he did each of his children, fearing the prophecy that one of them would overthrow him. Inside the belly of Crones, She waited in the darkness with her siblings. Her flame banked, but unextinguished. When Zeus rose and fulfilled the ancient doom, he split open the old god's belly and brought his brothers and sisters forth again into the light. Hestia was the last to be freed, though she had been the first to be taken. Yet she bore no envy. She did not weep at the loss. She had no need of thrones or titles. Her power was not in hierarchy, but in necessity. While the others thundered in temples of marble, Hestia lingered in the hearth's light was the first to falter. When cities rose in conquest, their laws were sworn beside her flame. When lovers wed, they touched her fire for fortune. And in the hours before dawn, when no other god stirred, she watched over the sleeping world, as she always had. The poets found little drama in her. They passed over her name in favor of battle and seduction. But the wise remembered, the hearth is what a house becomes only once it is lit. The hearth is what remains when all else is gone. A kingdom without a throne may still endure, but a home without a hearth is a ruin. And Hestia, eldest and youngest, forgotten and remembered, was never absent. In the end, she stood alone, not because she was cast out or driven away, but because she had chosen solitude. And in that solitude, she was loved not with passion or fear, but with reverence. For every fire sparked in her name, for every offering cast into the flame, her name lived on. She was the goddess of warmth, of safety, of return. When men lost everything and came back to ashes, it was Hestia's breath that stirred the first smoke once more. She needed no myth. She was the quiet truth beneath them all. Among the Olympians, there were gods of sky and gods of sea, gods of war and fire and wine, but only one whose sorrow could wither the earth, whose grief could turn abundance into dust. Dido. Her skin carried the scent of soil and wind. She wore the green mantle of spring and walked barefoot across the furrows of the earth. Mortals loved her, not in terror, but in gratitude. She brought them bread. She taught them the ways of planting and reaping. Without her, kings starved like beggars, and cities cracked open like husks. Yet Dido's heart, though broad as the plains of Arcadia, was ruled by one love above all, the love of her daughter. Persephone was born of Zeus, fair as a new bloom, laughing as she danced among meadows and rivers, untouched by shadow. Her footsteps light as petals. She was her mother's joy and mirror, and Dido never let her far from her sight. The gods watched her grow. Even Hades, stern and silent in his kingdom below, watched her. His heart, which had never known longing, stirred at the sight of her youth. He said nothing to Dido. He sought no blessing. He rose from the underworld in a chariot black as pitch, drawn by horses whose breath smoked like fire, and seized the girl as she picked flowers in the vale of Nyssa. The earth yawned open. The meadow was split, and by the time her companions screamed, Persephone was gone. Dido searched the world. She walked across the fields she had once blessed, her hair unbound, her robes torn, her voice from calling. For 9 days and nights she wandered, without food or rest, bearing torches in both hands. Not even the gods dared to speak to her, for her grief was a storm without lightning, a silence more terrible than rage. She came at last to the house of Hecate, who had heard the girl's cry, and together they turned to Helios, the all-seeing sun. It was he who told the truth that Hades had taken her, and that Zeus, father and king, had given his silent consent. Dido turned away from Olympus. She cast off her divinity and walked the earth as a mortal. She came to Eleusis, where she sat beside a well cloaked and unrecognizable. The daughters of King Celsius found her there and brought her to their mother, who welcomed the strange woman into her home. Dido nursed the queen's son, Daemon, and in secret tried to make him immortal, laying him in fire each night to burn away his mortal weakness. But the queen saw and screamed. The ritual was broken. Dido revealed herself not in wrath, but in sorrow and in her grief. She cursed the land. Nothing grew. The grain rotted in the field. Trees bore no fruit. The rivers ran slow and silted. Famine crept across the world like a shadow, and the smoke of dying hearths rose. Toward Olympus, men and women prayed not for favor, but for survival. And finally, Zeus relented. He sent Hermes down into the underworld to bring the girl back. Hades did not fight. He spoke gently with the voice of her husband who knew he had done what could not be undone. He offered Persephone a throne beside his own. She had not wept. She had not screamed, but her silence had, hardened like the roots of old trees. And before she left, she took from him a single fruit, a pomegranate, blood red and bitter. She ate 6 seeds. So it was that Persephone returned to the world. Above, and the fields wept with joy. Dido ran to her daughter, held her as if she could never let go. But the fates do not forget because she had eaten of the food of the dead. Persephone could not remain. For 6 months of the year, she would walk beneath the sun, and the flowers would bloom in her wake. But for 6 months more, she would return to the realm of shadows, a queen not stolen, but enthroned, and the earth would mourn. In her sorrow, Dido withholds her gifts. The winds grow cold. The trees cast off their leaves. The fields turn to frost. And so the seasons came into the world, not by decree, but by love. Lost and regained again and again. Dido accepted this bargain, though her heart never healed. She founded the Eleusinian mysteries, rites so sacred and secret that even the poets dared not write them down. They promised a glimpse of Persephone's path, a hope of rebirth, the whisper that death was not the end. Mortals came from every land to walk the sacred road, to be initiated into her rites. They fasted and prayed and wept. And in the dark, they saw something bright, a memory, a promise, a mother's fire. Dido was not often seen upon Olympus. She kept to the fields, to the temples where fires were lit and loaves were broken. She was no queen of thunder or tide. But when the people ate, they named her first. And when the snow fell and the harvest failed, they knew it was because a mother waited for her child to rise from the dark once more. Persephone was not born for darkness. She came into the world beneath the eyes of Dido, her mother's laughter woven into her breath, her skin the color of ripened grain. She was called Kor, the maiden, the flower of spring. In the meadows of the mortal world, she danced, untouched by age or grief. And wherever her feet touched the grass, wild flowers burst from the soil. She knew nothing of sorrow, for her mother kept sorrow at bay. She was the daughter of growth, of golden fields and clear skies. And yet no god or mortal can outrun the shadow that waits beneath the earth. The world was not made to be only light. There is always a door beneath the root. There is always a silence beneath the song. It was in one such meadow that her fate caught her. She stooped to pluck a narcissus, the bloom so pale and bright that it seemed conjured. In that moment, the ground broke open, not with thunder, not with war, but with inevitability. Hades, lord of the underworld, rose from the chasm with a chariot of black iron and horses whose hooves sparked fire. He reached out and took her. She screamed. The earth closed and the world changed. He did not demand her love, but he offered her power. No other goddess ruled as she did there. No one defied her. She was not the girl who had danced in her mother's fields. She had descended and the world had not followed. She sat beside Hades in silence, and something within her began to settle. It was not happiness, but it was certainty. When Hermes came to retrieve her, bearing Zeus's command and Dido's sorrow, she did not rush to him. She listened. She weighed the world she had left against the one she had come to know. And then, as if she knew what must come, she ate 6 seeds of a pomegranate, crimson and bitter. It was a choice, or perhaps the memory of one. The fruit bound her to the underworld, not forever, but for part of the year. Half in shadow, half in light. Bride of 2 worlds. When she returned to her mother, spring followed. The trees blossomed, the frost melted, the birds returned, but Kor was gone. She was Persephone now. She had seen the dead. She had ruled them. She had worn the iron crown. And though she smiled for her mother, there was a quietness in her eyes that had not been there before. She did not speak of what she had seen. Those who die do not return, but she had. And in her return was written the cycle of all things, the seed, the stalk, the harvest, and the fall. In the underworld, she came to be feared and worshipped as much as her husband, not for cruelty, for justice, for knowing. The arenas. The Furies served her as they served him. The souls of the dead knelt before her as queen. She was not warmth, but she was not cold. She was the stillness in the tomb, the rustle of poppies at a grave, the soft voice that reminds mortals that all things must sleep, even gods. She was honored in Elus beside Dida, in rites that whispered of death and rebirth. Initiates carried torches and fasted, seeking a glimpse of her path, the promise that even in death something stirs. She was not sung of in war. She was not invoked by sailors or kings, but every field bowed to her. Every grave was hers. Every mother who buried a child cried out to her in silence. Pesfanini did not choose her fate, but she shaped it. She wore no chains. She was not weeping in the dark. She was sovereign. And each year when she rose from the underworld and the crocus bloomed, she reminded the world that even what is lost may return, though never unchanged. Her story was not tragedy. It was truth. That joy and sorrow are never far apart, that the earth feeds on both. And so she endures in myth and memory, queen of spring and shadow, a goddess not of one realm, but of the threshold between. Long after the thrones of Olympus had been carved from cloud and marble, long after the Titans had been bound and the world divided between sky and sea and shadow, there came one who did not belong. He was not born into the cold splendor of Olympus, nor did he rise with spear or thunder in hand. Dionysus came into the world in secrecy, in sorrow, and in fire. He was the son of Zeus and Semele, a mortal woman of Thebes, and his story began not with war, but with a whisper. Semele was beautiful, and Zeus, ever wandering, came to her in disguise. But Hera, queen of heaven and wife to the king of gods, saw the shadow of infidelity bloom once more and moved against it with slow cruelty. She came to Semele as an old woman, kind and gentle, and planted the seed of doubt. If he truly is Zeus, she said, should he not reveal himself to you in his true form? And so, Semele, caught between faith and fear, begged Zeus to come to her as he came to Hera. Zeus had sworn to grant her any wish and bound by his oath. He obeyed. When he appeared in his divine glory, crowned in lightning, wrapped in celestial fire, the sight of him burned her to ash. But from her womb, he rescued the unborn child. He sewed the infant into his own thigh, carrying him there until he was ready to be born once more. And so Dionysus came into the world twice. Once of woman, once of God. He was a child of death and life, of mortal ruin and immortal spark. And from the moment he cried out, the world trembled with something new. He would never fit in the orderly halls of Olympus. His power was not in dominion, but in unraveling. Zeus, knowing Hera's wrath would not be cooled, sent the boy away in secret. He was raised first by Hermes, then by the nymphs of Nyssa, far from Olympus, in wild groves where vines crept over stone and music never stopped. There, Dionysus grew not like Apollo, straight and golden, but sideways, curling like ivy. He discovered the grape, the press, the cup. He drank, laughed, wept, danced, and taught others to do the same. But his joy was not simple. It was dangerous. Wherever he walked, reason softened, and the walls men built between themselves and their beasts cracked. As he grew, he wandered. He was a god without a home. He moved through Phrygia, Thrace, India. He came not with spears, but with drums, not with soldiers, but with women. The Maiads followed him, their hair unbound, their eyes bright with frenzy. They tore animals limb from limb. They danced until their feet bled. They howled his name, not in prayer, but in ecstasy. He was the god of wine, but not the mild sip of a cup in a king's hand. He was the god of intoxication, of letting go, of losing oneself in something greater, in madness, in music, in ritual. Yet those who denied him suffered. Prometheus, king of Thebes, cousin to Dionysus, mocked the god, called him a fraud, and forbade his worship. Dionysus came to him in disguise, soft-spoken and persuasive. He lured the king to the forest, dressed him as a woman, and led him to the Maiads. In their frenzy, they mistook him for a beast. His own mother, Agave, struck the first blow. When her eyes cleared, she saw the truth too late. She carried her son's head on a thyrsus, shrieking in triumph, and the god was nowhere to be seen. Dionysus did not rage. He did not raise his hand. He showed men the madness they kept within themselves, and then stepped aside as it bloomed. He returned at last to Olympus, not with supplication, but with inevitability. The 12 thrones were set, But Hestia, eldest and humblest, surrendered hers, and Dionys, youngest and wildest, took it. He belonged not by birthright, but by proof. He had walked the world. He had shown mortals both delight and despair. He had died and returned. No other god could say the same. Dionys became a symbol not only of joy, but of paradox. He was the god of theater where truth is hidden behind masks. He was the god of wine which heals and destroys. He was the god of ritual madness, of possession, of that thin and trembling line between ecstasy and horror. His temples were forests. His rites were secret. His followers laughed with tears in their eyes. His was not the worship of reason, but of surrender. He was never truly tame. Even among the gods, he moved like smoke. One moment, a laughing youth with ivy in his hair, the next a grim figure crowned in serpents. His power was not forged in battle. It was awakened in reality. His victory was not over monsters, but over restraint itself. And in every cup of wine, in every dance that forgets the world, in every mask that hides a second face, Dionys still moves. He was twice born. He was never meant to rule. But he made the world feel what it feared to admit. That order is a lie. And beneath the stone temples and sacred laws, there waits the truth of frenzy, of transformation, and of letting go. The gods of Olympus no longer walk among us. Their temples have crumbled. Their oracles have gone silent. Their statues lie buried beneath moss and ash. But they were once everywhere. Their names were whispered with awe, carved into stone, etched into the hearts of kings and slaves alike. They shaped the lives of mortals with laughter and wrath, lust and vengeance, caprice and favor. They governed not from some distant heaven, but from mountaintop palaces just out of reach. They were not perfect. They were not always just, but they were present, a mirror to the mortal soul, magnified to divine proportion. And yet time is the one god no other can defy. The old rites faded. The torches of Eleusis were extinguished. The feasts of Dionys gave way to altars of another kind. Temples that once rang with song now house sheep and dust. And still the Olympians endure not in thunder, not in glory, but in stories. They live in the rustle of pages, in the hush before a tale begins, in the hush after it ends. Their myths are not forgotten. They have merely changed their form. Zeus, who once ruled the skies with a clenched fist, now appears in the faces of kings, fathers, and tyrants. Poseidon, who shattered islands with his rage, is felt in every storm and shipwreck. Athena stands behind every wise decision, every clever war, every noble city. Apollo lives in music and prophecy, in the fever dream of art and sunlight. Artemis remains in forests untamed, in moonlight that touches the lonely path. Ares is found in every battlefield, not with a spear, but in the roar of bombs and the silence that follows. Hephaestus is there in the ring of hammer on steel, in every bridge and weapon, in every machine that bears man's ambition and suffering. Hermes flickers in every message, every word carried swiftly across continents, in every thief's grin. Hestia burns in every hearth, in every act of welcome, in the quiet center of a home. Dido waits with the seeds, with the plow, in every famine and harvest. Persephone walks alongside every mourner, her hands cool and steady, the promise of spring in her eyes. And Dionys dances still in the revel, the madness, the ecstasy that tears the world open and rebuilds it again and again. Some say the gods were never real, that they were dreams born of fear and firelight. But others say they were more than real. They were necessary not because they were gods, but because they were us made immense. They fought. They loved. They betrayed. They forgave. They demanded worship not to be adored, but because through them mortals could glimpse something beyond themselves. The divine was never meant to be distant. It lived in the soil, the sea, the blood. It still does. In the end, Olympus was never only a place. It was a mirror. It was the high place where men looked up and saw something like themselves. Written. And though the gods no longer answer prayers, though no thunder rolls in reply to offerings burned, their stories remain. They endure because we endure. And perhaps that is their truest immortality. When the wind rises through the ruins of Delphi, when the moon casts shadows across a forgotten altar, When a story is told by firelight and a child's eyes widen with wonder, the gods stir, not in power, in memory, in myth, and in that they remain eternal.